Per, many thanks for that. You've already heard a bit of me, so I will try and be as short as possible. The EU started to take an interest in the Arctic, I think, when Sweden and Finland joined the European community in 1995. That changed the outlook of the EU and its member states, I think. And since then, we have gone through various stages of developing our Arctic policy, and the Minister referred earlier on this morning to the latest policy paper that we've adopted, an integrated EU policy for the Arctic, with its 3 pillars of climate change and climate action, safeguarding the environment, sustainable development, and international cooperation. And the High Representative, Vice President Federica Mogherini, has also dedicated a passage on the Arctic in her global strategy on the external action of the EU, which was issued in June as well. We have a strategic interest in seeing the Arctic remain a low-tension area, and that the EU is keen to undertake action in all policy areas, from climate to sustainable development to search and rescue, etc. What I thought I'd do this morning is make 4 points about how the EU sees sustainable development in the Arctic. And the first point is there can be no sustainable development without tackling climate change. And the historic agreement that was reached in Paris is perhaps one of the most important decisions which will have an impact on the Arctic and help safeguard the future of the Arctic. And the EU and Canada can be very proud of the contributions that they made in bringing this about. And in particular, on the 5th of October recently, Canada, a number of EU member states, and the EU itself all deposited our instruments of ratification, which triggered the entry into force of the Paris Agreement in remarkably quick time. The EU and Canada will now step up their dialogue on climate issues in order to exchange views on the best practices of how we go about meeting our climate targets respectively, but also we will be discussing about how we can encourage other parts of the world to make good on their commitments under Paris as well. And I think, as been mentioned earlier on, I think there's a great interest as well in the EU and Canada working together on clean energy technologies, which will have a particular relevance to the Arctic. So point number 1, no sustainable development without action on climate change. Point number 2, sustainable development has to be based on the best possible knowledge, and therefore the EU pays significant attention to ensuring that we have the right science, the right research, to be able to develop some innovative solutions to development in the Arctic. As Marianne said, we've dedicated about 200 million over the past decade to funding on research. We are now undertaking a specific 40 million euro program in 2016-17, focusing on improving Arctic observation systems. Our program Horizon 2020 is also undertaking some projects to develop financing tools and advisory services for innovation, the development, bringing innovation projects to market. Our space and satellite capabilities are also playing an important role in this context. The Copernicus program is providing key Earth monitoring services, and the Galileo program, as it's rolled out, will offer greater possibilities for navigation capabilities. In terms of EU-Canada, we cooperate through the Atlantic Research Ocean Alliance with the US as well, keen to take forward the implementation of the Galway Statement. and and Canada and the EU were also recently at the Arctic Science Ministerial held under the auspices of the White House, which once again emphasized the importance of having an effective pan-Arctic observation system. So point number 2, good sustainable development requires the best possible science. Third point is sustainable development requires bringing all the stakeholders together, as we've heard a bit this morning in the previous session. It's vital we talk to each other, but it's also vital we listen to each other. Perhaps not one of the EU's strong points, but we're learning, and our engagement in the Arctic has definitely encouraged us to listen to all stakeholders in ensuring our policy is right. We've been participating vigorously in the Arctic Council working groups and task forces. Thanks very much, Marianne. And Ole later on will go into a bit more detail about the Northern Periphery and Arctic Programme, where we can bring together communities across the European Arctic, from Greenland to Northwest Russia, to discuss best practices, how you can bring innovation to SMEs in northern communities. We're also establishing an Arctic Stakeholders Forum to strengthen the networking amongst northern communities and enhance awareness of funding sources. Excuse me. Maybe I mentioned 2 other things as well. We hope to be making a contribution in the field of black carbon very soon, and we hope to be discussing this with Canada and other partners in the Arctic Council shortly. And I have to say I was very pleased that Minister Bennett referred to the opportunity now taken up by Canadian communities to take advantage of the Inuit exception under the seal regulation. We hope that this is indeed having a useful impact now. So that's the third point, important to bring everyone together. The fourth point, there can be no sustainable development without economic development of our countries as a whole, of the EU and Canada. And here, let me refer to CETA. You know that discussions are ongoing in Europe at the moment to put the finishing touches to EU consensus to allow for signature, hopefully next week at the EU-Canada summit. This will bring about economic growth, jobs and growth in the EU, in Canada, including in our northern communities. The EU is the largest export market for Nunavut and the Northwest Territories, and the elimination of tariffs on key exports, such as metals, minerals, and fish products, will have a positive impact for those communities. We hope that CETA will also bring about greater investment opportunities both ways, including of the EU in northern Canada as well. And let me just emphasize that I think the high labor and environmental standards which will be protected by CETA will have a positive impact in the north as well. So those are what I wanted to say, my 4 points as to how the EU can build sustainable development in the Arctic. I think if we get this right, we can demonstrate that globalization can work positively for our societies and citizens. Thanks.
Thank you.